killed her, George. He killed her.
She's dead.
I think you knew that already.
Oh, no. No, I didn't know. I didn't know.
Why didn't you know?
Well, she's not dead. She's not dead. She didn't get out of control. She's not dead. She's not dead. She's not dead. There's no way she's dead. There's no way. I can't. No way. No way.
You're watching True Crime Confession Tape, the channel where we uncover real stories of obsession, betrayal, and violence that end in tragedy. Subscribe now so you never miss the cases that reveal the darkest truths hiding in plain sight. May 3, 2010. Charlottesville, Virginia. Just after midnight, police entered the apartment of 22-year-old Yardley Love, a senior at the University of Virginia and a member of the women's lacrosse team. What they found inside was not the scene of a burglary, not the chaos of a stranger's attack, but the aftermath of a brutal assault. Yardley was discovered face down on her bed, unresponsive, with blood and bruising that told investigators something terrible had happened. In that moment, the image of two promising athletes, Yardley Love and her ex-boyfriend, George Hughley V., collapsed into a nightmare. The question wasn't just how Yardley died, but how a relationship between two celebrated students spiraled into obsession, violence, and murder. Before her name became a headline, Yardley Love was just 22 years old, a daughter, a sister, a teammate, and a friend. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, she was raised in a close-knit family that valued loyalty, education, and hard work. From an early age, Yardley stood out. She was competitive but kind, determined but never arrogant. Her natural talent on the lacrosse field made her a star long before she arrived at the University of Virginia. At UVA, Yardley was everything a college athlete was supposed to be. She balanced her demanding schedule with ease, earning the respect of her professors, teammates, and coaches. Friends described her as light-hearted, dependable, and compassionate, the kind of person who lifted others up when they were struggling.
She was compassionate and fun and kind-hearted and smart and just had like a lot of things going for her.
Truly saw the world through sunshine-colored glasses, just everything in a positive light.
A year after her tragic death, it is the happy memories of Yardley Love that friends and close family, like cousin Sharon Robinson, remember most of all.
When I think about her growing up, I think of her smiling, I think of her.
Ever since I've known Yardley, she always wanted to play lacrosse at UVA.
I look back at pictures that I have of her in probably 6, 7, 8 years old wearing Virginia lacrosse shorts or t-shirts. We got letters from so many people who were truly touched by her kindness and goodness. And so before too long we decided we want to do something to honor her memory.
But behind the smile, there were also quiet struggles that no one fully saw. Those who knew her best said Yardley had a forgiving heart. She was the type of person who gave people second chances, even when they didn't deserve them. It was this forgiving nature that kept her tethered to an on-again, off-again relationship with fellow student and lacrosse player George Hughley V. To her teammates, it was clear that the relationship was rocky, marked by arguments and tension, but Yardley rarely showed just how heavy the weight of that relationship truly was. In the weeks before her death, friends would later admit they noticed she seemed more anxious, more cautious. As if she knew that something was shifting, but couldn't find a way to step back. Yardley's story begins as the tale of a gifted young woman chasing her dreams. But it would end as a warning, a reminder that even the strongest, brightest lives can be undone by the darkness of someone they once trusted. The night of May 3, 2010 began like any other on the University of Virginia campus. But just after midnight, concern spread among Yardley Love's friends. She hadn't responded to messages, and when they went to her apartment, something felt wrong. Her door was locked, the lights were off, and no one answered. What happened next would forever haunt them. When the door was forced open, the scene inside was chilling. Yardley was found lying face down on her bed. At first, some thought she had suffered a medical emergency, but the signs quickly told another story. There was blood on her pillow, bruising on her face, and the unmistakable marks of violence. Her room was in disarray, with items scattered as if a struggle had taken place. And one detail stood out immediately to investigators: her laptop computer was missing. Detectives who arrived on scene were trained to look for patterns. What they saw didn't fit the picture of a robbery gone wrong. There were no signs of forced entry, no valuables stolen, no evidence that a stranger had targeted her. Instead, every detail suggested that Yardley had known her attacker. Someone had entered her room with purpose, someone who left behind chaos not for profit, but for control. The medical examiner would later confirm that Yardley had died from blunt force trauma, the result of a beating severe enough to fracture her skull and cause brain injuries. It wasn't a weapon that ended her life, it was raw violence, fueled by rage. And the missing laptop wasn't just evidence of theft. It was a clue, a desperate attempt to hide the truth. The crime scene left investigators with one chilling certainty: this was not random. This was personal. And the list of possible suspects would lead them straight to the one person who should have been furthest from suspicion: her ex-boyfriend, George Hughley V. The investigation quickly led to one name: George Hughley V. At just 22 years old, George seemed to have it all. He came from an affluent family in Chevy Chase, Maryland. He was a natural athlete, recruited to play lacrosse at the University of Virginia, where he wore the same colors, walked the same halls, and lived in the same world as Yardley Love. On the surface, George looked like the definition of privilege and promise. But beneath the polished exterior, there were fractures no one wanted to confront. Friends and teammates would later describe a pattern: a young man whose charm could turn into aggression with just a few drinks. Alcohol was his constant companion, and with it came violent outbursts, arguments, and threats. Police records confirmed that he had been arrested before for public intoxication and disorderly conduct. Yet those incidents were brushed aside, written off as mistakes of youth rather than warnings of something darker. Each ignored red flag allowed the anger inside him to grow stronger. Psychologists who studied the case noted how George's sense of entitlement and lack of accountability shaped his behavior. He was used to winning, both on and off the field, and when confronted with loss or rejection, he reacted with control and fury rather than acceptance. To him, relationships were not about trust, but about possession. And Yardley Love, the woman he once dated, had become the focus of his obsession. The motive, investigators believed, wasn't just jealousy. It was rage at losing control. In the final weeks of her life, Yardley had tried to move forward, to distance herself from him. But George couldn't accept that. On the night of May 3rd, fueled by alcohol and anger, he forced his way into her apartment. What followed wasn't an accident, and it wasn't a momentary lapse, it was the culmination of a dangerous pattern that had been ignored for far too long. When detectives pieced together the timeline of May 3, 2010, they uncovered chilling details. George Hughley hadn't planned a normal visit. Witnesses recalled seeing him intoxicated, stumbling his way toward Yardley's apartment just before midnight. He was angry, desperate, and looking for confrontation. What police discovered inside that small Charlottesville bedroom told a story of violence that was far from accidental. Yardley had been found unresponsive, her face bloodied, her body battered. George admitted to kicking in her door, wrestling her onto the bed, and shaking her violently. But in his words, it was never meant to kill her. He described it as a drunken fight that went too far. Investigators, however, saw the truth differently. Bruises on her neck, bleeding in her brain, and injuries consistent with blunt force trauma revealed that this was no accident, it was assault, pure and deliberate. The revelation that stunned many wasn't just what George had done that night, but what had been ignored for years. Friends and teammates later admitted they had seen the signs: the shouting matches, the controlling behavior, the violent temper. Even police encounters and warnings hadn't changed his path. Each time, George was protected by privilege, excused by the idea that he was young, talented, and would grow out of it. But instead of changing, his behavior escalated, until it ended in Yardley's death. For the public, the twist was painful. This wasn't just the story of a broken relationship. It was the story of how silence, denial, and unchecked violence created the perfect conditions for tragedy. Yardley's murder wasn't unpredictable, it was preventable. And that revelation shook the University of Virginia community to its core. In the courtroom, the reality of what had happened inside that Charlottesville apartment was laid bare. George Hughley faced trial in 2012, accused of second-degree murder and grand larceny. Prosecutors argued that his years of violent outbursts, his obsession with control, and his reliance on alcohol made this tragedy inevitable. Defense attorneys countered with a story of a drunken mistake, insisting that he never intended to kill Yardley. But the evidence told a harsher truth, one that could not be explained away. The jury listened to testimony from Yardley's friends, medical experts, and George himself. They heard about the night of the attack, the broken door, the signs of struggle, the catastrophic injuries Yardley suffered. And in the end, they reached a verdict, guilty. George Hughley was sentenced to 23 years in prison. For Yardley's family, it was a form of justice, but never true closure. Nothing could bring her back. Out of that grief, something extraordinary happened. Yardley's mother and sister created the One Love Foundation, a movement dedicated to educating young people about relationship violence. What began as a tribute to Yardley grew into a national campaign, teaching thousands how to recognize the warning signs that have been overlooked in her own life. In that way, her story has continued to save lives, even in her absence. But the questions remain. Could this have been prevented if the warning signs had been taken seriously? How many other young women are caught in relationships that hide this same danger? And what does it say about a culture that excuses violence until it's too late? Yardley Love's story is more than a headline. It is a haunting reminder that behind every tragedy lies a pattern, and behind every silence, a chance to stop it before it begins. This has been a True Crime Confession tape. Thank you for watching. If Yardley's story has moved you, and if you believe these stories must continue to be told, please subscribe to this channel, share this video, and help us keep these voices alive. Because in the end, awareness isn't just power, it's survival.